Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had just finished branding Senator Kennedy as a billionaire's puppet who was merely pretending to be ignorant on live broadcast television. In response, Kennedy took a calm sip of his water, opened his yellow legal pad, and posed a single fundamental question regarding economics. Even though she holds a degree in economics from Boston University, she was completely incapable of providing an answer. Go ahead and smash that like button, because what unfolds next is the absolute most methodical, systematic obliteration of a political brand ever witnessed in congressional history, and she brought it entirely upon herself. Ocasio-Cortez leaned aggressively into the microphone, sweeping her left hand wide in a gesture born of muscle memory from thousands of Instagram live streams and years of theatrical performances for the cameras she usually controlled. Senator Kennedy, let's talk about transparency, since that is supposedly the reason I was invited to appear before the Oversight Committee today. She declared, her voice projecting the unwavering confidence of a person who had meticulously rehearsed every single syllable. Everyone sitting in this room knows exactly what you are. You sit up there adopting that fake country accent, pretending to be some folksy Louisiana grandpa who just wandered in from a local crawfish boil, when the reality is that you are a billionaire's puppet, a corporate errand boy dressed in a cheap suit. Kennedy simply wrote something down on his yellow legal pad, never bothering to look up. His pen moved with slow, deliberate precision across the lined paper, displaying the handwriting of a man who had been taking meticulous notes in courtrooms since before his current accuser was even born. You are not folksy, Senator, and you are not charming, she continued. You are a total fraud who plays dumb so that your donors can continue to play rich. And I, as someone who actually worked for a living, who poured drinks and scrubbed tables long before I ever set foot in the halls of Congress, am not going to sit here and pretend that you deserve the respect this institution is supposed to. Come on. The C-SPAN camera slowly panned to the left, revealing a packed gallery with standing room only, where staffers lined the walls shoulder to shoulder. The CNN broadcast immediately cut to a split screen. AOC was on one side, gesturing dynamically and alive with righteous energy, while Kennedy occupied the other, completely motionless, save for his pen moving across the paper like a seismograph, recording the tremors of an earthquake the room had not yet felt. AOC then turned her body to directly face the viewing gallery. This man voted against increasing the minimum wage, against student debt relief, and against expanding Medicare. He serves the wealthy elite, lectures the impoverished, and utilizes a Southern drawl to make it all sound like plain common sense. She snapped her gaze back to Kennedy. I do not respect this performance, Senator, and neither does anyone under the age of 40. Light applause rippled from the Democratic side of the aisle. Sitting in the second row, a progressive journalist was already furiously typing out the headline, AOC confronts Kennedy in fiery exchange, having half written the story before Kennedy had uttered a single word. Kennedy finally finished his writing, placed his pen down perfectly parallel to the legal pad, took another slow sip of water, and adjusted his reading glasses. He looked directly at Ocasio-Cortez for the first time since she had commenced her tirade. 5 seconds of profound silence stretched across the room, the exact kind of dead air that makes television producers frantically check their audio feeds. Representative, he began, utilizing the exact same slow Louisiana cadence and the precise vowels his mother had used in Zachary, Louisiana, 50 years prior. Thank you. I appreciate all of that, and I made sure to write it down. He gently tapped the legal pad. Now, you mentioned that you were invited here to discuss transparency. That is indeed correct. The committee has a number of questions regarding financial disclosure, ethics compliance, and your campaign finance practices, and I have a few of those questions prepared. He opened a massive, thick binder that was tabbed and color-coded, showcasing the kind of exhaustive preparation that made other senators look as though they had studied for the entirely wrong exam. But first, since you yourself raised the subject of economics and you mentioned the minimum wage, student debt, and Medicare, I would like to ask you something incredibly simple. He peered at her over the rims of his reading glasses. You hold a degree in economics from Boston University, graduating cum laude in 2011. That is a fine school, and congratulations on achieving those honors. There was absolutely no sarcasm in his voice, only genuine warmth, which made his next words land with devastating impact. So here is my question, Representative. Can you tell me the difference between marginal cost and average cost? AOC's hand, still raised mid-gesture, froze completely. Because you have proposed massive legislation that would restructure 1/6 of the American economy known as the Green New Deal. You have openly talked about price controls, federal job guarantees, and fundamentally restructuring the energy grid. Those are all policies that depend heavily on a deep understanding of marginal cost. So I am just curious, from one person with an economics degree to another, though mine happens to be from Oxford, can you define it for me? The entire hearing room seemingly held its collective breath. AOC's eyes darted toward her staff seated directly behind her. A staffer leaned forward to help, but there was nothing to whisper. The question was far too elementary to require research and far too foundational to simply fake. Senator, I am not here to take a pop quiz, she deflected. It is not a pop quiz, Representative. It is a basic definition first semester stuff. I will wait. She still did not answer. Her jaw tightened visibly, providing the first physical tell, a micro-expression indicating that her rehearsed performance was finally meeting genuine resistance. Kennedy nodded slowly. All right, let me ask a much easier one. What is the money multiplier effect, and why does it matter so much for federal spending? Silence reigned. How about supply elasticity? You co-sponsored a bill aimed at capping insulin prices, which is a wonderful goal. Can you explain the specific supply elasticity concerns that economists immediately raised about that bill? More agonizing silence followed. AOC's left hand, the one that had been energetically gesturing like a symphony conductor, finally dropped to the table and stayed there. Kennedy closed the thick binder very gently. Representative, I am not trying to embarrass you, but you just spent 2 solid minutes calling me stupid. You called my accent fake, and you said that I played dumb. He took off his glasses and set them squarely on the dais. I managed Louisiana's $20 billion pension fund for 16 years. I protected the retirement savings of every single teacher, firefighter, nurse, and police officer in the entire state. I can define marginal cost in my sleep. I learned it at Oxford, and I used it every working day for 2 decades. He placed his glasses back on his face. You possess a degree in economics, and yet you proposed the Green New Deal, a resolution that you yourself claimed cost $0 because it is non-binding. Your own chief of staff admitted it was actually about restructuring the economy, not about the climate. Independent studies estimated the actual implementation cost at an astounding $93 trillion, and when you were challenged on the math, you insisted it costs $0 because it is just words on paper. He leaned back slightly in his chair. Back home in Louisiana, we have a saying, do not brag about your recipe if you have never even turned on the stove. You have introduced over 100 pieces of legislation, Representative. Do you know how many of them actually became law? 2. And one of those was merely renaming a post office. He let that statistic settle into the room like heavy smoke. That is a meager 2% success rate. If a baseball batter hit 2%, they would not even be in the minor leagues. They would be working in the parking lot. But you have built a massive national brand on those 100 press releases. Each one gets a viral tweet. Each one gets heavily shared, but absolutely none of them became law. That is not legislating, Representative. That is simply content creation on a taxpayer-funded $174,000 salary. AOC's posture shifted subtly, but the sharp cameras caught it. She was no longer leaning forward aggressively. Instead, she was sitting up straight with both hands flat on the table, as though bracing herself against an incoming impact. And while we are heavily on the subject of jobs, Kennedy continued, effortlessly flipping to a brand new tab in his binder. Let's talk extensively about the 25,000 jobs you killed. Amazon HQ2, Representative. In February 2019, Amazon planned to build a massive second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens. It promised 25,000 jobs with an average salary of $150,000, bringing $12 billion in economic activity for New York. The incentives were entirely performance-based, meaning that if Amazon did not create the actual jobs, they did not receive the tax breaks. It was not a handout. It was a structured deal. Kennedy produced a printed document. This is your own tweet from the very day Amazon pulled out. He read it aloud, speaking slow enough for every single word to register with the audience. Today was the day a group of dedicated, everyday New Yorkers defeated Amazon's corporate greed. He set the printed tweet down. Defeated, you called it, a victory. Taking away 25,000 families who would have earned six-figure incomes, that was a victory to you. AOC pushed back hard against the narrative, arguing that those were massive tax giveaways directed to the richest man on earth, while public housing within her own district was rapidly falling apart. The incentives were strictly performance-based, Kennedy repeated firmly. No jobs meant no tax breaks. You know that to be a fact. You simply chose to ignore it because fighting Amazon created a much better Instagram story than ensuring 25,000 of your constituents received pay raises. He pulled out another prepared document. After Amazon left, they eventually opened a smaller office in Manhattan, providing 1,500 jobs located completely outside your district. You immediately posted a photo of yourself lounging on a couch with the caption, and I have it right here, "Me waiting on the haters to apologize." He held up the printed screenshot for the room to see. You openly celebrated losing 94% of the potential jobs, sat comfortably on a couch, and gloated about it. A staffer directly behind AOC closed her binder with a quiet thud, emitting the distinct sound of someone realizing that all prepared talking points were no longer applicable. Kennedy then pulled out a constituent letter. This letter was sent directly to this committee by a constituent of yours, a Bronx resident and a small business owner. She wrote, and I will not read the entire thing, but I want to highlight this specific part. 3 of my absolute best customers were tech workers who departed New York after Amazon canceled HQ2. My revenue severely dropped by 30%. I have to work Sundays now. AOC said she won. I am still trying to figure out what exactly I won because it certainly wasn't customers. He set the letter down. 25,000 jobs, Representative. And the people who tragically lost out on them do not live inside your Instagram comment section. They live in your actual district. They constitute the working class you constantly say you fight for, but you fought Amazon instead of fighting for them simply because Amazon made for a much better villain. AOC opened her mouth to retort. Moral victories do not pay the rent in the Bronx, Kennedy finished for her. I know because I checked. He turned the page. The 13th of September 2021, the Met Gala. Representative, you attended one of the most utterly exclusive events in the entire world, costing $35,000 per ticket, wearing a pristine white dress with the words "Tax the Rich" painted boldly on the back. Kennedy then produced the official House Ethics Committee report, 26 pages bearing official seals released in July 2025. He did not wave it theatrically. He said it on the dais calmly, exactly like a lawyer entering critical evidence. The Ethics Committee conclusively found that you impermissibly accepted expensive gifts in connection with that evening. Your partner, Riley Roberts, received a totally free ticket worth $35,000. You completely failed to pay the fair market value for the dress, the jewelry, and the accessories. Furthermore, the committee found, and I am reading verbatim from page 14, evidence suggesting that the designer may have lowered costs in direct response to statements from Representative Ocasio-Cortez's staff. He looked up at her. Your official staff pressured a small independent designer to grant you a discount while you paraded around in a dress that loudly proclaimed, "Tax the rich." AOC's grip on her pen tightened dramatically, her knuckles whitening as the pen pressed hard enough to leave a permanent mark on the paper beneath it. But here's the specific part that truly stays with me, Representative Kennedy said, producing a series of printed emails from the report. Your hairdresser's agency sent invoice after invoice long after the event concluded in September, October, November, and December. Your former campaign staffer, the specific one handling payments, never responded, not even once. The agency eventually wrote, and this is pulled directly from the committee's own exhibits, obviously, it would look terrible if we had to officially file a complaint with the NY Department of Labor against Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for Congresses. He set the damning email down and stared at her. A small business, a hairdresser, someone who wakes up early, works tirelessly with her hands, and builds a loyal clientele, one single client at a time. That is the exact kind of person you repeatedly claim you represent. She styled your hair for the biggest, most glamorous night of your year, and your staff simply didn't pay her for months. They didn't return her emails, and they didn't pick up the phone. The gallery remained utterly silent. It was not the charged electric silence of anticipation, but the profoundly uncomfortable silence of sudden recognition. Several individuals in the press section were awkwardly staring at their shoes. You wore a dress that said "Tax the Rich" to an exclusive party that costs more than most Americans earn in an entire year, and you didn't even pay the hairdresser, Kennedy stated. He shook his head, not in outright anger, but in an emotion much closer to deep disappointment. Back home, we have another saying, don't preach tithing if you're actively stealing from the collection plate. You built your entire political brand on holding the powerful accountable, but when a working-class woman sent you an honest bill, you completely ghosted her. AOC's voice was significantly quieter than it had been all morning, stating defensively that the payments were handled by a staffer who was no longer employed by her office. You immediately blamed your staff. The Ethics Committee dutifully noted that as well, Kennedy said, tapping the heavy report. You told investigators, and I am quoting directly, I wasn't privy to the invoices. You attended the most heavily photographed event of the entire year wearing a political statement worth thousands of dollars, and you brazenly claim you didn't know the bill wasn't paid. He paused for effect. Representative, if you were not privy to a few $1,000s in outstanding invoices, how exactly are you qualified to completely restructure the American economy? AOC did not provide an answer. For the very first time during the hearing, she was no longer looking at Kennedy or at the television cameras. She was staring blankly down at her binder, at the meticulously prepared statement she would never get to read, and at the talking points that no longer applied to the situation. Kennedy smoothly reached for the next tab in his binder. Representative, let's take a moment to talk about Riley Roberts. AOC's head snapped up, her eyes widening just a fraction, but the C-SPAN camera was positioned close enough to capture it perfectly. Mr. Roberts is your romantic partner. You have lived together continuously since 2016, and you publicly announced your engagement in 2022. However, you have not legally married. Is that correct? AOC fired back that her personal relationship was not his concern. Your personal relationship became committee business the exact moment you signed federal documents explicitly calling Mr. Roberts your spouse. You did that, Representative, not me. Kennedy produced several ethics filings from 2022 and 2023, each explicitly listing Roberts as a spouse for the purposes of travel and event attendance. The House Ethics Committee strictly defines a spouse as someone to whom you are legally married. You are not legally married to Mr. Roberts, but you listed him as your spouse to aggressively receive benefits, free travel to Japan and South Korea in 2023, and a $35,000 Met Gala ticket in 2021. He laid the official documents side by side on the dais. Now, here is exactly where it gets interesting. When it comes to required financial disclosure, Mr. Roberts is suddenly not listed as your spouse. He does not appear on your disclosure forms in any capacity. His substantial assets, his stock trades, and his employment remain completely invisible to the public. Kennedy then pulled out one more document, AOC's very own co-sponsored piece of legislation, the Bipartisan Restoring Faith in Government Act. You personally wrote this bill, Representative. It would completely ban the spouses of members of Congress from trading individual stocks. You held numerous press conferences about it. You tweeted extensively about it. You passionately called it essential for restoring public trust. He set the printed bill directly next to the questionable ethics filings, but the bill explicitly only applies to spouses. It does not apply to boyfriends, it does not apply to fiances, and it does not apply to long-term partners who conveniently never quite make it down the aisle to the altar. He stared her down. When you desperately need a free ticket to the Met Gala, Riley Roberts magically becomes your spouse. When you urgently need to hide his lucrative financial activities from the public eye, he reverts to being your boyfriend. When you need to exempt him entirely from your own anti-corruption legislation, he is miraculously just a guy you happen to live with. AOC immediately turned to her left. The attorney seated directly behind her leaned forward, whispering urgently into her ear. Kennedy simply waited, patient, unhurried, radiating the calm demeanor of a man who knows the answer is absolutely never coming. The Foundation for Accountability and Civic Trust publicly called this a loophole, but it isn't a mere loophole, Representative. Loopholes are accidental oversights. You specifically designed this. You have been engaged since 2022 for 4 whole years. Your engagement ring suddenly disappeared from public photographs back in November 2023, and you have never once explained why you haven't actually married. He held up an article from the Washington Free Beacon. Investigative reporters have explicitly noted, and I quote, Roberts is functionally immune from AOC's own bills that would ban the spouses of members of Congress from trading stocks, just so long as they cleverly remain unmarried. That is not my personal analysis, Representative. That is theirs. Kennedy deliberately set everything down and folded his hands. Now, I want to ask you a very direct question, and I want you to completely understand why I am asking it. Willful misrepresentation on official congressional forms can legally result in a civil penalty of up to $50,000 or, in extreme cases, imprisonment of up to 5 years. That is not my opinion. That is the very law you swore an oath to uphold. He peered at her intensely over his glasses. Is Riley Roberts your lawful spouse or isn't he? Because you have told the federal government both, and both statements cannot possibly be true. Total silence engulfed the chamber. AOC's attorney whispered frantically again. AOC did not respond, not to the frantic attorney, not to Senator Kennedy, and certainly not to the cameras that were eagerly recording the single longest pause of her entire political career. I'll take that profound silence as I need to speak with my lawyer, Kennedy remarked quietly, and the American people will effortlessly draw their own conclusions about exactly why. Kennedy smoothly opened the final tab in his binder. His voice shifted noticeably lower and significantly slower, the exact register a seasoned trial lawyer employs for his final closing arguments. Representative, you have meticulously built your entire career on one singular word more than any other: accountability. You have loudly said it in speeches, in viral tweets, and in committee hearings. You have passionately demanded it from corporations, from billionaires, and from your own colleagues. So let us finally apply it directly to you. He produced FEC financial filings from 2018 and 2019. Your former chief of staff, Saikat Chakrabarty, is a Silicon Valley millionaire. He formally founded 2 political action committees, Justice Democrats and Brand New Congress PAC. These PACs successfully raised approximately $3.3 million. They then subsequently transferred over $1 million into 2 private companies, Brand New Congress LLC and Brand New Campaign LLC, companies that Mr. Chakrabarty also fully owned and controlled. Kennedy traced the complex flow of cash with his index finger. PAC money goes in, LLC money comes out. LLCs by law do not have to report exactly how they spend it. The money completely disappears into a corporate structure possessing 0 disclosure requirements. He looked up directly at her. Do you know exactly what that's called, Representative? AOC just stared blankly at him. It's widely called dark money. It is the exact specific thing you have spent your entire political career furiously railing against: untraceable funds moving swiftly through shady shell structures to purposefully avoid disclosure. Your own chief of staff fundamentally built the machine, successfully ran the machine, and hastily resigned when the FEC finally started asking questions. Kennedy produced the official FEC complaint formally filed by the National Legal and Policy Center. This is fully documented and completely public. The complaint explicitly states, and I am reading it now, These are not minor or technical violations. We are talking about massive real money. In all my years of extensively studying FEC reports, I have never once seen a more ambitious operation to systematically circumvent reporting requirements. AOC's shoulders visibly dropped. It wasn't dramatically pronounced an inch, maybe two, but the vibrant woman who had confidently walked into this room with the rigid posture of someone about to boldly deliver a keynote address was now slumped, sitting exactly the way exhausted people sit in hospital waiting rooms. The pen she had been gripping so tightly lay abandoned on the table, and her hands rested lifelessly in her lap. Mr. Chakrabarty officially resigned in August 2019. The FEC aggressively opened an investigation. And you, heralded as the most famous anti-dark money voice in all of America, never once addressed the actual substance of the serious allegations. You merely called them false and abruptly moved on. Kennedy pulled out one absolute final document, but simply moving on didn't magically make it go away. The FEC subsequently found additional entirely undocumented expenditures totaling $127,000 between 2020 and 2022 with severely insufficient vendor documentation. And this year, a brand new complaint surfaced. $19,000 in campaign funds were paid directly to a psychiatrist. Your campaign weekly called it a legitimate expense. Americans for Public Trust firmly called it personal spending, thinly disguised as campaign costs. He closed the massive binder, set it cleanly aside, and fully removed his glasses. For the very first time in the lengthy hearing, he spoke entirely without any notes. No legal pad, no documents, no exhibits. Just a 7'3" man looking squarely at a 3'6" woman across a crowded room full of relentless cameras. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, I started this entire hearing with a basic question about economics. You completely couldn't answer it. I asked about the 25,000 good-paying jobs you happily killed. You called that a moral victory. I asked about a struggling hairdresser you didn't pay. You immediately blamed your staff. I asked whether your partner is legally your spouse. You couldn't say either way. I asked about untraceable dark money heavily flowing through your campaign. You called it false and never once explained the missing $1 million. He methodically put his glasses back on. You came here today fully prepared to call me stupid. But the tragic thing about aggressively calling someone stupid, Representative, is that it only effectively works if you yourself are smart. And smart people can easily answer basic questions about their very own field of study. Smart people don't ruthlessly kill 25,000 jobs and proudly call it winning. Smart people don't wear a tax the rich dress to an elite party they didn't even pay for. Smart people don't draft massive anti-corruption laws featuring a loophole shaped exactly like their very own boyfriend. And smart people, really smart people, don't falsely build a career righteously fighting dark money while their own chief of staff is busily running the most wildly ambitious dark money operation the FEC has ever seen. He casually reached for his water glass. Back home, we have one final saying. If you're going to proudly ride a high horse, make incredibly sure it's actually your horse. You've been loudly riding accountability your whole entire career, but it was absolutely never yours. You just conveniently borrowed it for the cameras. He drank deeply and set the glass firmly down. No further questions, Mr. Chairman. The silence stretched painfully for 12 long seconds. Kennedy's pen rested peacefully on his legal pad. The CNN camera rigidly held on AOC's face, her jaw tightly set, her eyes blindly fixed on the middle distance, wearing the horrified expression of someone furiously processing information they hadn't remotely planned for. Chairman James Comer looked down at the witness table. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, do you wish to respond? AOC leaned cautiously toward the microphone, pulled back anxiously, and then leaned in again. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to formally request a 5-minute recess. Comer nodded in agreement. The committee will stand in recess. AOC rose slowly from the witness table, not too fast, not too slow, adopting the extremely careful speed of someone acutely aware that HD cameras flawlessly track every movement. Her staff quickly formed a protective barrier around her. Two aides, a communications director and her attorney, defensively surrounded her. They moved swiftly toward the corridor as a tight group with cell phones already desperately pressed to their ears. The requested 5-minute recess slowly became a 5-minute delay. At precisely 12:32 p.m., AOC's chief of staff nervously approached the chairman's dais. The hushed conversation lasted exactly 90 seconds. The chief of staff then returned to the waiting press cluster loitering near the corridor. Representative Ocasio-Cortez is unfortunately not feeling well and will absolutely not return to the hearing today. Her office will happily submit written responses to any remaining committee questions. The shocking announcement moved violently through the press gallery like an electrical current. Phones whipped out, fingers typed furiously, and the explosive story practically wrote itself. Kennedy calmly closed his binder, systematically gathered his legal pad, proudly stood up, nodded respectfully to his colleagues on both sides of the political aisle, and walked steadily toward the exit. Reporters immediately surrounded him like a swarm in the hallway. Senator, any comment on Representative Ocasio-Cortez not returning? Senator, do you truly think you were too harsh? Kennedy stopped completely, looked warmly at the media scrum, and smiled. It was the exact same polite, folksy smile he had started the hearing with, the one that hadn't wavered or changed once in 2 solid hours. Folks, I merely asked simple questions based entirely on public records and the representative's very own public statements. If simply answering questions about your own career is deemed too harsh, then our national standards have precipitously dropped lower than a snake's belly in a deep wagon rut. He smoothly adjusted his tie, and that is pretty low, y'all. Have a exceedingly good afternoon. He walked cleanly out. The viral clip of AOC desperately requesting a recess exploded within the hour, but something highly unusual occurred, something that definitively separated this event from the ordinary, fast-paced cycle of political content. The clips didn't fracture or fragment. People enthusiastically watched the whole entire thing. The audience retention rate on the full 7-minute video hit a staggering 78%. YouTube's complex algorithm, purposely designed to reward high watch time, pushed the video harder than any piece of political content since the fiery Trump-Biden debates. It racked up 80 million views in just 72 hours, scaling to over 200 million cross-platform views in the very first week alone. Each distinct round of questioning became its own viral sensation, with each individual clip soaring above 10 million views independently. The social media hashtags told the entire brutal story. Number boyfriend Loophole fiercely trended for 6 straight days and successfully crossed from chaotic social media directly into prestigious mainstream journalism. CNN, the AP, and Reuters all prominently used the phrase in major headlines. Wikipedia promptly created an official entry. Tax the rich, pay the hairdresser effortlessly became a legendary meme format that significantly outlasted the traditional news cycle. An edgy street artist situated in Brooklyn spray-painted the iconic Met Gala dress on a massive brick wall with "Pay the Hairdresser" in huge block letters. That single image alone hit an astonishing 30 million views. But the severe institutional damage moved much faster than the internet memes. The House Ethics Committee, which had previously reprimanded AOC strictly over the Met Gala gifts, aggressively opened a highly formal investigation directly into the Riley Roberts spouse designation. It followed 2 dangerous tracks: the blatant misrepresentation on federal forms carrying harsh penalties up to $50,000 or 5 grueling years of imprisonment, and a vastly expanded review of absolutely every travel and event where Roberts had improperly received spousal benefits from 2022 straight to Lansinling Arshawu. Subpoenas demanding Roberts's financial records, including all stock trades, real estate transactions, and cryptocurrency holdings dating back to 2019, were mercilessly issued within exactly 10 days. The FEC ruthlessly reopened the Chakrabarty files. Powerful subpoenas instantly went out to Brand New Congress LLC and Brand New Campaign LLC, demanding completely transparent banking records from 2017 to 2019. The entirely separate complaint regarding the highly suspicious $19,000 paid to a psychiatrist triggered a chaotic third investigative track. One FEC commissioner blatantly told Fox News, "A clear pattern of financial opacity from someone who famously built a massive brand on transparency that's a deep systemic concern, not a mere isolated incident." Within a few short weeks, investigators identified an astounding additional $127,000 in vague campaign expenditures, lacking any clear vendor documentation spanning from 2020 to 2022. The mighty Department of Justice ominously opened a preliminary legal review concerning the spouse designation issue, heavily focusing on potential false statements listed on federal forms. The FBI's elite financial crimes unit legally requested Roberts' complete, unredacted financial activity records. When the prestigious Washington Post officially reported that Roberts had frantically retained a high-powered criminal defense attorney, the breaking story generated a massive second wave of news coverage that proved infinitely worse than the very first. A prominent former federal prosecutor bluntly told CNN what everyone at home was already thinking. When a sitting congresswoman's partner actively hires a criminal lawyer, the main question isn't whether there's an actual problem. It's exactly how large that problem truly is. 3 agonizing weeks later, a strict court order successfully compelled the full disclosure of Roberts' hidden trading activity. The shocking record showed $890,000 in lucrative tech stock transactions successfully executed over 18 months, suspiciously concentrated deeply in the exact tech sector AOC held direct regulatory authority over through her powerful seat on the Financial Services Committee. The FBI immediately opened a formal, severe investigation into highly potential insider trading. In a panic, Roberts retained a second criminal attorney. The resulting political collapse followed a predictable, devastating pattern that AOC, a brilliant student of political narratives, would have easily recognized if it were happening to literally anyone else. Her overall approval rating inside NY14 plummeted a massive 15 points in just 2 weeks. For the very first time since originally taking office, she disastrously fell below 50% approval among Hispanic voters, her most loyal core base. The drop was a shocking 19 points among young voters under 35, the exact generation she had totally owned and captivated since 2018. At her very first public town hall following the disastrous hearing, a fiery 60-year-old Dominican voter angrily stood at the microphone and loudly demanded, "Exactly how many stocks does your shady boyfriend possess that you simply don't want us to see?" The resulting viral clip, netting 8 million views, perfectly became the ultimate symbol of a furious constituency that had abruptly stopped protecting her. A formidable primary challenger rapidly emerged within the very month. Carmen Reyes, an authentic Puerto Rican born right in the Bronx, a tough former Marine, a licensed CPA, and a former small business owner. Her powerful campaign announcement video was brilliantly shot directly in front of the empty, boarded-up storefront she had been tragically forced to close after the Amazon HQ2 deal collapsed. She angrily held up her very last unpaid rent invoice and stared intensely into the camera lens. This beloved store closed forever because AOC selfishly killed 25,000 jobs just to get a flashy headline. I don't need headlines. I desperately need customers. The video exploded with 22 million views, raising a historic $4.7 million in grassroots small dollar donations in a mere 30 days, an absolute unprecedented record for a primary challenge against any sitting incumbent in New York. The famous squad totally fractured. Rashida Tlaib nervously issued a statement so incredibly vague it read exactly like a sterile legal filing. "I heavily support all colleagues currently facing right-wing attacks," carefully avoiding naming AOC or addressing any of the specific damning allegations. Ayanna Pressley coldly waited 8 full days before finally speaking about the critical importance of pure transparency in modern progressive politics, a calculated sentence that was universally decoded by pundits as a sharp knife wrapped in silk. The powerful Progressive Caucus held an urgent emergency meeting. AOC was noticeably not invited. An anonymous source told Punchbowl News, she's rapidly become a massive liability. Every single time she goes on live TV, the other side just relentlessly asks about Riley Roberts. Democratic Party leadership ruthlessly executed the exact kind of slow, professional, calculated abandonment that the swamp of Washington perfected a long time ago. Speaker Pelosi coldly stated at a press conference, every single member should be fully prepared to answer questions regarding their public service and their financial disclosures, pausing heavily every member. Senator Schumer, currently facing the looming threat of an AOC Senate challenge that had aggressively threatened him for years, cheerfully delivered her political eulogy with a bright smile. I openly welcome any candidate who is genuinely transparent about their family's finances. The DNC totally stopped transferring valuable funds to AOC's campaign committee. DCCC fundraising emails, which had prominently featured AOC as their absolute top financial draw for 5 consecutive years, surgically removed her name entirely. A stressed DCCC staffer bitterly told Axios, every single email we send with her name gets completely spammed with replies shouting, boyfriend loophole. We are heavily losing money instead of actually raising it. 3 separate progressive PACs quietly and permanently redirected their valuable funds. 2 prestigious universities quickly canceled her scheduled speaking engagements at $20,000 each. A major tech company embarrassingly pulled her highly touted conference keynote, listing the official reason as a vague scheduling conflict, while the real reason was glaringly obvious to absolutely everyone involved. AOC went entirely, completely silent for 14 long days. The single most prolific political social media presence in all of America posted absolutely nothing. The total silence itself organically became a massive news story. AOC Goes Dark dramatically ran across over 200 different media outlets. When she finally desperately responded, it was via a highly edited, pre-recorded Instagram video. There was absolutely no live format, no open comments, and absolutely no questions allowed. She furiously called the hearing a deeply coordinated, vicious right-wing attack entirely designed to violently silence a brave young woman of color in Congress. The sad video received a paltry 2 million views, her absolute lowest engagement numbers in 3 whole years. The absolute top comment on the platform, boasting 45,000 likes, simply asked the unanswered question about Riley Roberts again. 2 tortuous weeks later, she bravely tried an ambitious Instagram Live comeback. She started off incredibly confident, talking passionately about detailed healthcare policy. Within 3 short minutes, over 500 angry comments viciously flooded the screen, entirely screaming, boyfriend loophole. She desperately tried to ignore them. At the 7-minute mark, a highly visible super chat aggressively appeared. If Riley isn't legally your spouse, why did you eagerly sign federal forms swearing he is? AOC stared blankly at the camera, completely stopped talking, and abruptly ended the entire stream. The devastating 1/1-second clip of her frantically reaching for the end button, her eyes completely frozen and her hand hesitantly hovering, became the absolute final tragic symbol. The powerful woman who had impressively built a massive empire on the back of live streaming simply couldn't go live anymore. 6 months later, the dominoes had finally finished falling completely. Carmen Reyes comfortably led AOC by an insurmountable 4 points in internal polling, the very first time in AOC's entire career she had ever trailed a primary challenger. The flagship stock trading ban bill she had passionately championed was unceremoniously pulled indefinitely. One snarky Republican senator hilariously tweeted, "I totally support this bill, but perhaps the arrogant author should try to comply with it first, earning a massive 2 million likes." The FEC officially levied brutal fines totaling $107,000, $65,000 directly on Chakrabarti and an additional $42,000 straight on AOC's campaign. It was the absolute largest penalty ever successfully assessed against someone who had hypocritically made aggressively fighting dark money the true centerpiece of their political career. The Ethics Committee ruthlessly issued a formal, severe reprimand, specifically for the shady spouse designation, her second massive disciplinary action in exactly 2 years, and sternly ordered her to accurately amend every single disclosure form spanning from 2019 straight through to 2025 to fully include Roberts's hidden financial information. They set a hard deadline of 90 days. She permanently canceled all of her exploratory plans for a massive Senate run directly against Schumer. She quietly canceled the highly anticipated 2028 presidential conversations that had served as the buzzing open secret of Washington for 3 whole years. Her once glorious political horizon, which originally stretched infinitely from the very future of the Democratic Party to becoming the youngest president in American history, violently contracted down to one single, totally desperate question: could she even manage to hold her very own seat? Political prediction markets darkly ranked her squarely among the top 3 incumbents most highly likely to brutally lose a primary, and among the top 5 most likely to ultimately face federal indictment. Meanwhile, Kennedy's overall approval rating skyrocketing in Louisiana naturally rose to an impressive 73%. His legendary coffee mug, emblazoned with "Don't mess with taxpayers," wildly sold 50,000 units in a single week. He generously donated the massive proceeds to a relief fund explicitly for struggling small businesses defrauded by corporate non-payment. When a local Louisiana journalist eagerly asked if he'd meticulously prepared his devastating response far in advance, Kennedy just laughed heartily. Prepared? I cheerfully prepared for that precise response for 73 long years. It's called honestly living a life you don't continually have to apologize for. Back in the Bronx, right on Grand Concourse, Maria Castillo slowly wiped down the glass mirrors in the neighborhood salon she'd proudly owned for 22 years. She'd intently watched the explosive hearing entirely on her lunch break, viewing it on an incredibly old iPad casually propped against the very station where she expertly cut hair. When Senator Kennedy passionately talked about the 25,000 incredible jobs she'd killed, she'd nodded very slowly. She'd personally lost her 3 absolute best, highest-paying customers when they were forced to move away to New Jersey after Amazon tragically pulled out. Her salon revenue had plummeted a devastating 30%. She miserably worked all through Sundays now. When Kennedy vividly talked about the struggling hairdresser who didn't get paid after the glamorous Met Gala, Maria abruptly set her sharp scissors completely down. "A tax the rich dress," she muttered quietly to absolutely no one, and she still didn't pay the damn hairdresser. She shook her head in total disgust. "My poor mother would have aggressively slapped me." When AOC desperately requested a recess and ultimately didn't come back, Maria didn't cheer or celebrate. She simply sighed the deep, tired sigh of an exhausted woman who had loyally voted for AOC twice before and absolutely would not be voting for her a third time. "Mija," she sadly said to the dark screen, "I completely don't need a famous, glamorous representative. I just desperately need a representative who pays her bills on time." She quietly opened her afternoon appointment book, heavily picked up her scissors, and simply went back to hard work, exactly the way hardworking people always do while their wealthy representatives arrogantly pose on red carpets in expensive dresses they haven't even finished paying for. If you successfully made it this far, you just watched exactly what truly happens when someone who artificially built a fake career on accountability tragically meets someone who actually practiced it every day for 73 years. Smash that like button right now if Kennedy's response literally made you stand up out of your seat in your living room. Please subscribe for more incredible moments when undeniable receipts brutally beat empty rhetoric. Share this highly important video with absolutely everyone who still truly believes that hardcore facts, intense preparation, and a slow, methodical Louisiana drawl are infinitely stronger than fake Instagram followers and empty designer slogans. Comment below right now. What was your absolute favorite, most brutal moment? The failed economics question she completely couldn't answer, the poor hairdresser who didn't get paid, the shady boyfriend loophole, or the massive dark money revelation? Let us know in the comments. Turn on those notifications because AOC's massive troubles are absolutely far from over. The Ethics Committee investigation is completely active. The severe FEC fines are permanently on the record. The FBI is ruthlessly reviewing Riley Roberts' stock trades. The angry primary challenger is rapidly gaining ground. And somewhere deep in Louisiana, a brilliant 73-year-old senator is peacefully sipping hot coffee from a mug that proudly says, "Don't mess with taxpayers," quietly reading his briefing papers, and patiently waiting for the very next arrogant witness who mistakenly thinks calling him stupid is a valid substitute for having actual answers. God bless all our incredibly hardworking small business owners who proudly show up every single day, faithfully pay their bills, and absolutely never get a fancy Met Gala invitation. God bless absolutely every single taxpayer who still firmly believes their elected representatives should answer basic foundational questions about their very own record. And God heavily bless every single American who truly understands that accountability isn't just a shallow brand, it's a lifelong practice. She arrogantly came to lecture. He thoroughly came to cross-examine. Only one of them successfully stayed in the room. As they always say down in Louisiana, seriously, don't ride a high horse unless it's genuinely yours.